Hello and welcome to Full Focus, where law and news intersect. I'm Crystal Parham. In today's edition, we're going to discuss gravity knives. What is a gravity knife? Is it against the law? And why? We're going to discuss that with Martin Morris. He is a criminal defense attorney practicing in Manhattan, New York, and he's kind of an expert on this issue. Hello, Martin, and welcome to the show.
Hi, how you doing?
So, what is a gravity knife, and what's the big deal about a gravity knife?
Well, there's under New York law certain weapons, regardless of what your intent is. Certain types of weapons are illegal. We call them per se weapons. For instance, you can't just go walking around with nunchucks. I think switchblades is the one everybody knows. But daggers, certain types of weapons that are clearly offensive weapons. One of them is a gravity knife, and originally it was added to this per se weapons list following World War II. What was happening was that people were coming back with these German knives, which was like a springless switchblade. You would hold it at your side, you would just let the lever go, and the blade was pretty heavy. It would just fall and lock into place. So instead of being pushed out by a spring and locking into place, you would just let gravity fall and lock it into place. And if you ever see one of these, it's obvious it's an offensive weapon.
And so that was what? That was in World War II that law was originally crafted?
It was after World War II. There was a type of knife that was coming over. They were actually used by German soldiers in World War II.
And the reason that it was banned, well, the laws were in place because they felt it was like an offensive weapon that could be used at any moment to attack someone.
Yeah, like a Chinese throwing star. There's no value to it other than tossing it and sticking it and stuff. Or another good example is a Pelham knife. I believe they're called, where you press the button and the blade jettisons out of it through, I don't know if it's gas or, whatever it is. With these knives, you can shoot out a blade out of them.
And so what happened next? I know there's been a very big push to repeal these laws or change these laws. How is that affecting New Yorkers today?
Well, I think that what happened was, and everybody remembers from the 90s in New York, people were going around slashing everyone's faces. There's still a little bit of that in the Bronx. But there was so much of it in New York City in the 90s, with the high crime and everything, that there was a lot of creative things going on. You start looking at like quality of life, just different ways of hitting things. And one of them was you could take a pocket knife, any lockback pocket knife that you can buy legally can be snapped open with one finger by just inert force instead of circumferential force, which is what the statute says, moving it in a circular motion, or letting it fall down with gravity. But what's happening, starting the 90s onward, and really it's in New York City, was that there's a trick where you can take any pocket knife and snap it open. And so that's what happened. They call it the flick of the wrist test, that there's a trick to it. And so people that are having lawful knives are being arrested and have been for a long period of time in New York.
Well, are gravity knives banned in New York in terms of can you buy them in New York? Are they illegal to sell?
Well, the definition is just a way of opening the knife. So the law will apply to any type of knife that you have if you could flick it open with the wrist. And so people are buying knives at Modell Sports. You can buy knives at Sears. You can buy knives at a hardware store that once you know the trick, that they all can be flicked open, or a large majority of them can.
These are just like regular utility knives, is that right?
That's correct. A lot of these knives are clip-it that you'll see on a utility belt. They have the little clip on them that can go on your pants. And even the state of the law, an officer can stop you just by seeing one of those on your pants and then make an arrest without even flicking it. If his experience and knowledge is such that he knows that type of knife and it can be flicked open, then he can make an arrest.
So you're saying that if the officer sees the clip, doesn't even see the knife, they can stop you just based on that?
Yeah, as long as they say the right thing. And the thing is based on their experience and training. They recognize it as a knife that could be flicked open in that manner.
So these aren't people that are I guess bad guys that are going out to commit crime. These are like regular people, right, that have jobs. Is that right?
Yeah, there's no bad intent whatsoever. If somebody's out threatening someone, if someone's waving a knife around, or if someone's taking a knife to do something bad, that's a separate crime. That's a possession of a knife with the intent to use it unlawfully. Like, for instance, I just had a client, and this really upset me probably like a month and a half ago. He was coming home from work. He was a window repair guy, and he had his tool belt on it. And one of the tools was the knife that was sitting there. So he's eating a sandwich. He comes off of work, and next thing he knows, he's grabbed and arrested based on his tool belt. And he was in on $5,000 looking at a felony bump up where he was looking at years in prison over that. Eventually got the case dismissed because his boss put up his bail. His work really came out for him writing letters to the DA to get the case dismissed.
So
That was very upsetting to me to see someone in that situation.
so he was just a guy on a break from his work with all of his tools. So obviously he was coming from work or at work, and he just got arrested and put in jail for $5,000 bail.
Yes, and all he was doing was eating a sandwich after work. It's just that this officer happened to recognize that as one of the knives that he could flick open.
This seems like a very unfair law, Martin. What are they doing? I mean, is anything being done to fix it or mitigate what's happening?
Yeah, there was a reform legislation that went up to the Governor Cuomo. So it passed the Assembly, it passed the Senate, and it went to Governor Cuomo for signature. And there was a lot of pushback by the district attorney's office, by police unions, and Cuomo really wants a higher office, higher than New York, I'm sure. So he vetoed it, and he said he wanted to see something other than the way it was written. And so his own changes were incorporated into the gravity knife bill. It passed the Senate 60-1, meaning 60 senators were for it and only one was against it. And it went to the governor's desk, and just recently he vetoed it. So he vetoed his own language.
He vetoed his own bill that he wrote.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, based on the Sheriff's Association, Police Association. In a way, it gives police the ability to stop and arrest anyone they want. Right. So if you're a police officer, you may feel that's a tool that you don't want to lose.
What is the upside to, other than police arresting people that really aren't doing anything wrong, what is the upside to keeping this law? I don't really see one myself, but I'm asking, is there any upside other than arresting more people that are doing nothing?
Well, I think for law enforcement, you want to be able to do as much as you can, to be able to stop people, to be able to effectuate an arrest, see what's in people's pockets. I think that there's a certain flow towards, from liberty to tyranny. That's just been recognized in our law for hundreds of years.
What about, let's say, like, for instance, your client was actually working, he was having his lunch, he was on the job. So if you're arrested and you're actually on the job or you use this knife for work, is there a whole process you have to go through to hopefully get your case dismissed? Does that happen?
Well, you would be basically begging on the discretion of a district attorney to dismiss a case or bring a case based on their prosecutorial discretion. So, for instance, you could have one guy, two people exactly, the same. Person A, person B. Person A comes in with letters, the exact same night. He has his W-2s. He writes letters from people from work, letters of recommendation. You might be able to get a DA to do something. You have another guy who just has the knife clipped to him without more. He may be looking at some time there. The exact same conduct, the exact same situation.
Does this mainly happen in Manhattan, or is this happening in all the boroughs? Do you know?
Well, it's mostly in Manhattan, for what I understand. But this is something that's pretty much just happening in New York City. Other places, like upstate, they're a little horrified when the general public sees what's happening in New York City.
You have an interesting anecdote about gravity knives. I believe you went to the first department and you argued a case. Is that right?
Oh, yes. My very first trial.
Tell us about that.
I think it was back in 2004. And I was representing a Laotian man who was pulled over for a traffic infraction by anti-crime, which is our plainclothes officers that are there to look for major felonies, basically. So they tossed his whole car open, went through everything, and he had a tackle box along with a lot of fishing supplies in the back of his car. And inside the tackle box was two exact black Gerber lockback folding knives. They were the exact same knife. They were both manufactured by Gerber. And one of them could be flicked open the fourth time he tried it, and then the other couldn't be flicked open like after 9 tries. So at the end of the trial, he was acquitted of one, and he was convicted of the one that could open the 40th time.
But they were the same knives. They were the same knives. Is that right?
Yes, exactly the same knife. Everybody agrees it was a Gerber. It was purchased legally, but it was based on how the officer was able to open it. And I actually brought in a knife manufacturer. You know, I think it was Carmillis Cutlery, I believe it was. If I got the name right, it's been over 10 years. But he came in and he explained that this type of knife has a spring mechanism where the blade just doesn't willy-nilly fall out, that there's a safety spring mechanism. And what the officer was doing when he was flicking his wrist, when he was making that snap, he was bypassing the safety mechanism. So he was explicitly opening the knife in a manner that it was not designed to do. And in fact, it was designed not to open that way for safety reasons. But he was convicted on that.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, and the appeal that we brought in, we tried to preserve what's called void for vagueness, where you have a law that people don't know if it applies to them or what they can do to basically shape their conduct to the law. It's void for vagueness. So it's so vague that a reasonable person wouldn't know what's a crime and what's not. So we preserved that issue. It went to the First Department, which is the higher court in New York, and it was rejected by the court.
But I would think that's a great argument, because who knows that you can't have a knife that opens with a certain amount of force? And I mean, who knows that?
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with the skill of the person.
Yes.
Like I've seen enough of these cases where I'm very proficient, and I would bet someone $100 we could walk to any hardware store in Manhattan, you know, anywhere in New York City. I could get one of these and snap them open.
Well, that is so interesting. Thank you so much, Martin, for giving us that insight. Okay, guys, don't buy any knives that you can open with the flick of a wrist. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.